Robin Zander, scene A1.
Hello and welcome back to Snafu. I'm Robin Zander, your host, and today I am sitting down with Pamela Larde, PhD, who is a researcher on one of my favorite topics, and that is joy. She's a director of education at the Institute of Coaching, and she is the author of Joyfully Single, The Practice and Science of Joy. Pam is coming on stage at Responsive Conference to talk about the tactics and specifically the utility of joy. Often, and this is as somebody who has spent a lot of time pursuing joy from a place of utility in my life, from a place of how is this practical and how is this functional for me, the state that I enjoy, but also do my best work from in a state of joy. So we talk about in this conversation, for example, the difference between happiness and joy. And what is the utility of joy, and how do we make use of this emotional state in our lives? Pam is coming on stage to lead a workshop on joy and the utility of joy at Responsive Conference 2024, and I hope you enjoy this wide-ranging interview with Pam Larde. All right, Pam, thank you for sitting down with me today.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. I'm excited.
Yeah, I am so excited that you're coming on stage at Responsive, and I'm eager to talk a little bit about the background of your work and sort of what, as somebody for whom joy has been an organizing principle for decades now, what led you to this work? What led you to study joy?
So admittedly, I will say that probably what influenced me is my own disposition for joy. I mean, I just kind of grew up in a joyful household, and that's just kind of my approach to life. But from the standpoint of the research, I spent probably about 10 years researching how people face and overcome barriers and challenges in life. And the populations I've studied are so different. Divorcees, first generation college students, military personnel coming home from combat and their families, people who've experienced trauma. And so I often got the question, what's the intersection between all these very different populations? Or you're all over the place. And as I really sat down and looked at what are the commonalities, it was clear to me that they were seeking joy. They were trying to find ways to get past divorce to joy, past combat to joy, past trauma to joy. And I will say that my disposition for joy probably influenced that, because I probably could have been looking at all of their transition experiences. But joy was the thing that really tugged at my heartstrings and my scientific strings. And it's just this beautiful collaboration, those two parts of me.
For me, there were a lot of challenging moments in my childhood. I mean, fairly typical stuff, right? Bullying, being a sensitive kid in a rural town.
Me too.
And there were a couple of moments pretty early on. I had the good fortune for my parents to homeschool me in seventh grade. I studied abroad in Costa Rica for a year in high school.
It's my favorite place.
And then I walked into a gymnastics gym at 19 after 10 years as a runner, burnt out on running and discovered gymnastics. And all three of those moments were these moments of awe. Another very similar was the first time I saw a circus performance. I saw Cirque du Soleil's Alegria. And I mean, even the name Alegria, right, is joy.
Yes.
And when I think about the life that I pursue or my efforts in entrepreneurship today, there are these moments of, like, I pursue that awe, I pursue that delight, I pursue that joy very explicitly because I had those early experiences that kind of wired me for, like, oh, that's a thing that I want to chase.
Yes. Oh.
In your research or in your personal experience, studying these different populations, what leads people towards joy or not? Like when somebody develops, as you and I have, a disposition towards joyfulness, and then we can maybe also define joy. What leads to that disposition, and what leads not to that?
Well, one of the things that I think is definitely common for these populations, and just in general, and you probably can see how this is playing out in our society currently, is that when we have really difficult times and we overcome those difficult times, or we start to get a sense of hope for a different trajectory, that is something that not only stimulates our joy, but it accelerates our joy. So when people do go through things like divorce and they do the work to try to heal after that, there is a level of joy that one experiences through that process, or even just the victory in some cases of exiting a relationship that was, very dangerous or not healthy, and not knowing that you can do it, but then actually achieving it. Those are the kinds of things that trigger joy. So a lot of times people do think, well, those are the people who are just joyful, or you just have to have a disposition of joy, and oh, you were just born that way. But in fact, we're finding that people are using joy as a means for survival. We saw it a lot during COVID. People getting together and having wine celebrations and get-togethers on Zoom, and D Nice playing his music every night. I mean, so it's a very intentional practice, especially for those who don't naturally just wake up in the morning joyful.
One of the things that you've done is, and that you'll be talking about at Responsive Conference, is joy isn't just feeling good,
Oh
right?
God.
You define it a little bit more strategically, right? But
Yeah.
I think maybe even the idea, and it's something I struggled with for many years, of the idea of like, oh, the joyful idiot, right? The stupid clown, right? It's like, oh, you're happy, but like you're also a fool. So
Oh God.
maybe how do you define joy? And then I'd love to hear your reaction as to you clearly relate to some elements of that.
So much right now, that the mockery of joy, and it's just like, we prefer to see people in pain and downtrodden, and so that's part of the reason why I'm making all these dramatic gestures. But to define joy, it is more than just a feeling. It is more than being happy or feeling good. It is linked to our values and our ethos, who we are as human beings. So I would, to distinguish happiness from joy, and I think both are valuable, so I don't necessarily pit one against the other. But happiness is experiences and change, and things that happen from the outside in, and joy is what happens from the inside out. And so, yeah, so
I just made an expression because I've never tried to define that distinction that way, and I love it.
yeah, and if I look at the scientific definition, and I look at the American Psychological Association, the APA's definition, they say that joy is an exhilaration of the spirit, and to that I add that it's an exhilaration of the spirit that exists regardless of whether or not things are good or bad, through positive and negative experience,
Mm,
which also distinguishes joy from happiness, because happiness is dependent on what's going on in our environment and is responsive to the stimuli that we are experiencing in our world. Joy does that too, but it doesn't only do that.
hmm Will you say a little bit more about exhilaration of the spirit? I think that's such an interesting phrase.
Yeah, I love that phrase so much, which is why I keep that as a part of my own definition of joy, because it speaks to the energy that joy brings. If you think about any civil rights or any social justice movement, whether that is civil rights movement, any movement, you'll notice that the experiences of joy that people have, even through those really difficult movements, Black Lives Matter, out of that sprung the Black Joy movement, the Black Men Frolicking #movement, and all of that stuff energizes us to keep going and to keep pursuing whatever it is that we're passionate about and whatever it is we want to see changed, which is what I call revolutionary joy, because it's joy that energizes us to engage in change.
Talk, if you will, a little bit about your book, Joyfully Single. Why that focus? What is that focus? How did you come to write this book?
Yeah, and there was a lot of reluctance on my part as a social scientist putting out my work on joy for the first time in a large way in a book about being single, because it's almost hidden then from people who think, oh, well, it's not talking about me because I'm not single, or whatever the case may be. So that was a difficult decision, but I did decide to move forward with it, for a couple of reasons. Coming out of COVID, the pandemic shutdown, there were a lot of people that were struggling with loneliness. It's now looked at as one of the, like a pandemic of its own, and in which people are really struggling and suffering with loneliness. So I did think that it was an important topic to address. And then there's just a lot of backlash. And while this book isn't just for women, I certainly talk about the challenges that men face as well. But there's a lot of backlash against women who are older, 40s, 50s, 60s, and are single or childless. And the societal backlash against that has really has been damaging. I mean, it's caused people to fear, am I going to be alone for the rest of my life? And what kind of value do I have because of the way that I am seen in society? And men, on the other hand, are suffering in silence because it's not taboo when men are single. And if they are struggling and if they are lonely, they can't say that in certain circles because it's like, what do you mean? You should be living the life. You're single, So it's a whole different experience.
And talk to me about the interrelationship between your academic study of joy and the book.
So this book is where I introduced my multidimensional framework of joy. And this is what is the culmination of my research for the last 20 years. So weird to say that. Like, I don't know how I've been doing research for 20 years, but it's the culmination of that, of really my entire body of work. And looking at my work through a lens of joy, and then also intersecting that with the literature that's already out there. And the literature on joy is pretty thin. It exists, but it's thin, and it can be found in different places. Like in neuroscience, they look at the brain waves and how the brain responds to joy. You see it in social justice studies, in terms of how people use joy to promote justice. You see it in psychology, of course, and so in religious studies. So it shows up in so many different ways, but these different areas aren't communicating, and they don't reflect each other. They don't agree on what joy really is. And so part of when I stepped into this arena, I really wanted to find a way to have a unifying understanding of what joy is, and a conversation that enables us to at least understand it well enough to embody it and to create practices around it.
And that's something that I think, correct me if I misspeak, but you really strive to do in your work, and I know that that's something you're bringing to stage at Responsive Conference, is the practicality, making these concepts that, as you say, are not necessarily deeply well studied academically, historically, but that have been a part of, I would even say, like, human thriving for as long as there have been humans, right? Like
Right.
joy and fulfillment are some of the reasons that the human race continues.
Yeah.
How do you make this practical and tactical for attendees of Responsive Conference or for readers of your book?
Yeah. So within that framework of joy, there is a process, and it really just sort of looks at our well-being. It's rooted in our well-being. And that's again, another difference between happiness and joy, is that happiness can occur outside of well-being types of practices. I mean, we can be really happy to see somebody fail. We can be really
Oh,
happy.
interesting.
Yeah, we can be really happy to, name it, and it's just, they're not healthy behaviors for ourselves or for others. Joy, which is one of the things that has been consistent throughout the research, whether it is neurology or religion or psychology, is that joy is tied to our well-being, and it's rooted in our well-being. So not only does it create well-being, but it also nurtures the well-being that's there. Again, there's some overlap because happiness can do that too, but there are happiness practices that don't support well-being, and the distinguishing factor is that joy, just in the nature of what it is, does nurture well-being. So practically speaking, what I've sort of outlined is the practices of joy. And a lot of times we think that joy is outward expressions, and if you can see their face and it's joyful. But there's also elements of or expressions of joy that are quiet and peaceful and meditative. And so sometimes people think, I'm not that kind of person. I'm not outgoing. I'm not like this. I'm not going to dance all over the place. And so it allows people to experience joy in an authentic way, that's true to who they are. I'll give you one example. So when my daughter's dad and I, we're not together anymore, and so he's remarried. And when her stepmom used to come to, well, she still does, when she started coming to her games and her events, she would just be like overjoyed, screaming, and like, and I have this really quiet family. And so we're just, we'll watch her dance on the stage and we're just like emotional, little tears, quiet. And she's over there screaming. And I'm like, I'm the mom. And what I've learned is two things. Joy is contagious, because now our family screams too. If not competitive, I don't know which one it is. But it's also expressed very differently by different people. So the way that my family expressed joy wasn't wrong. It was just how we embodied it. And so I want people to understand that living out embodying joy, there's not a prescription for how that has to be done, and that people can do it in their own authentic way.
Nice. Responsive conference is about work, or at least ostensibly about work and collaboration, and how do we do that in a way that is more joyful and more effective. What's the interrelationship between joy and work in your mind and in your study?
I see our personal and our professional lives as this seamless thread that exists together that we really can't separate. And I don't say that to say let's let work, infringe on our personal lives or anything like that, but just to understand that what's happening in our personal lives impacts our work life, and what happens in our work life impacts our personal life. So it's important for us to see that connection. And the common thread for me is the idea of well-being. And if, like I said, joy is rooted in well-being. And if we are at work and we are not experiencing well-being, there's not a lot of joy in that work. And therefore, there's not a lot of productivity, commitment, growth that's happening in those environments. And I would think that workplaces would want to be places in which people thrive, grow, are committed, and we're seeing great productivity. So it benefits individuals for sure, but it also enhances the quality of the organization and the experiences that people have, whether they work there or they are a client, of that organization.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And what can folks who are attending Responsive Conference expect out of your workshop?
So I'm hoping that people are willing to get involved and get up and engage. I have a couple of practical sort of activities and processes that I would like to take people through so that they can practice in real time, and not just get the theory, but actually understand, what it can feel like to engage in joy practices, even if you're not feeling joyful in the moment.
Awesome. Pam, this is great. It's really sweet to sit down with you. Thank you for agreeing to the interview, and thank you for coming on stage at Responsive Conference 2024. I really can't wait for your session.
Thank you, Robin. This is an honor.
Last question, where can folks listening and watching go to learn more about you and your work?
I think the best place is either LinkedIn or Instagram. And in those places, I have links to all of the things that I have been doing, one of which is a Epic Joy retreat in Costa Rica.
Amazing.
Yes.
Awesome. Cool.
So, yeah.
Pamela Larde, thank you so much for the conversation, and I can't wait to see you in September.
Thank you.